You work for the legendary general manager, Robert Hyland. Tell us a little about him and what that was like.
Well, I thought that he was a figurehead. I came to this station, KMOX, and where I had come from in Boston, the general managers kind of oversaw the sales department but didn't do much else. I met this tall, good-looking man. He reminded me of Ernest Hollings, kind of carried himself the same way, you know, a deep, stentorian bass sound. And I thought, he probably has nothing to do with the station. Seems like a real nice guy. As it turns out, Bob, he was one of the most important civic leaders in 20th century St. Louis history. He just called all the shots. He was on all the boards. He would hang up on the mayor. The mayor would call him for advice, the county executive, the senators. When big politicians had to come through, they first had to go into his office. He was one of those larger-than-life guys. And I came here in August for a tryout. August 28th, I think. It was a Saturday. He called me the next morning at my hotel at 9:15. He said, "Be in my office at 9:45. Was he trying to figure out if I was drunk or hungover or whatever? Anyway, I met him, and he said, "We don't want you to come here for a cup of coffee." I think he was trying to be Bill Paley, you know what I mean? And he was one of those guys who owned one of the 7 a.m.s, or was the general manager of the 7 a.m.s when that's all you could own. And as it turns out, I didn't come for a cup of coffee. I had the full 20-ounce venti, you know, and then some, 20 years here.
When did you come to the job you have now as the host of the show that you run now? Was it talk radio as we know it in those days?
Well, May 14th, 1990, I was taken off overnights and fill-ins and paired with Kevin Horrigan, who was a freelance broadcaster, because even though he had worked in St. Louis for years, he had left the St. Louis Post-Dispatch for the St. Louis Sun, a newspaper that tried to take on the Post-Dispatch and failed miserably after 7 months. So he was available. Hyland liked him. Hyland needed some place to put me. And we first thought the name of the show would be Two Irish Guys Who Need the Work. And then we decided to call it The Morning Meeting. Kevin became a free agent in 1996, and so he went to another radio station. And then I've worked with Carol Daniel and McGraw-Milhaven and others. But I've been in the mornings pretty much since then, May of 1990.
And over those years, do you find the people you talk to, has it changed? Are people more outspoken now? Are they more critical now when they vent?
Well, I always thought the callers here and everywhere, and I grew up in Cleveland where there was a loud talk show host called Pete Franklin, and then in Boston, you know, the callers are all really caustic, and I find that the callers can be caustic here. But what I notice now that I don't recall 20, 30 years ago is the bullet points that people have. The politicians seem to want to stay on their guarded notes and not get off of it. You know, it's tough to pierce their armor. And so many of them talking the same bullet points that I don't recall that 20 years ago. I mean, you interviewed...
No, I think it has changed in the sense that we've become so sophisticated in the management of information now. You know, everybody has a media coach and a message coach, and it's stay on message and all that kind of stuff, which sometimes it's a little less fun than it used to be, but you still have to keep at it, you know, and I think that's one of the things that you do is
well,
you know how to bore in.
Well, you know, maybe I need a media coach to do that or learn how to deal with some of these guys. But, yeah, I think you're right. Once in a while you do get someone candid, you know, who just, and you've met them, the Barry Goldwaters or the John McCains, and, boy, they're good to have.
Now, what do you think you'll be doing 20 years from now? What comes next for you, Charlie?
Well, I like history, so if I had the wherewithal, financial wherewithal, I'd find a nice beach for at least 6 months a year, or the mountains 6 months a year, maintain St. Louis as my home 6 months, and I'd like to read history. There's so many books out there. Among them, books by Bob Schieffer, of course. Bob Schieffer's America. I'd really like to read that. I'm translating that now back into the original Greek. But no, I'd like to read history. I'd even like to write some history, if I had my druthers.
Well, you've always been a champion of St. Louis. I think nobody stands second to you in that.
Well, St. Louis is a great historic town, and your hometown newspaper, now your new hometown, Washington Post, said it's one of the most historic cities in the world. You know, we're right across the street now from the historic Dred Scott decision. Dred Scott and his wife Harriet walked in the old courthouse in 1846, and we have many connections to the Civil War. You know, this year we're commemorating the anniversary of the Lincoln-Douglas debates. The 7th and last one took place here, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. St. Louis is a great baseball town, we know that, and a beer town, you may know that, but it's also a great historic town, and I think it makes it very interesting.
If you had to sum up being here in the job you have, I have a sense that you really like doing what you're doing.
Well, it beats working for a living. Here I am, for example, on KMOX Radio, and Bob Schieffer, who is the moderator of Face the Nation, the second longest running television program in America, gets to spend 2 hours with me. You know, I've gone to auctions where people bid on people like Bob Schieffer, and they spend $5,000 to have lunch, and they pay me to get to meet you. This week on Monday, Alan Alda was in the studio. I mean, how can you beat that? And
well, that's kind of the way I've always felt about it. It is, you know, being in these kinds of jobs, they come to you. You don't even have to go to them, and so it's a great way to spend your time. Well, Charlie, you are truly an institution here.
Or should be in one.
No, I don't think so at all. And it would be hard to imagine radio in St. Louis without your voice. I want to congratulate you on 20 years at KMOX.
Well, thank you, Bob, and thank you for all your contributions to our show as you do on Wednesday mornings. We really appreciate you slumming with us, but we learned so much from your contribution, and I just think the world of you, and I wish you 20, 30 more years as well.
Thank you very much. So thank you, Charlie, and thank you, St. Louis. Charlie, I hope you're around for another 20 or 30 years.
Thanks a lot, Bob.
Okay.
Thanks.